What's going on YouTube? This is Seamus 99. This is weird. This is a change. Uh I am finally back. I have been gone for longer than I should have been gone for. And I don't really want to get into why, but TLDR military. And I am here today to bring you the Epic War 1 review. So every time I started a new Epic War series, I would spend a little bit of time during the first episode of the series where I would basically just go over the last game, but it was always really scuffed. And there's a certain person I play these games for. His name is Laswin. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I would have never touched these games if he hadn't suggested them to me. But I'm glad he did because they are pretty enjoyable overall. They've been an experience, even though it's taken me like over 2 years to over 2 years, and I haven't finished all 5 of them yet. But yeah, we'll talk about that in a different video maybe. Anyway, this review video is gonna be over Epic War 1. I'm gonna basically sit here and give my thoughts on it. So let's talk a little bit about Epic War 1. If you don't know what Epic War 1 is, it's basically a Flash game that came out a long time ago. I actually don't know what year this game came out, but I'm gonna say somewhere in the 2000s it came out, where you basically controlling the units from the left side. They come out of your kingdom, and then they march across the battlefield to the right side. And the enemy, which is an AI, is also sending out units to like kill you. And basically, your goal is for your troops to kill their castle before their troops kill your castle. Epic War 1's a pretty rudimentary game. There's literally 15 levels, and one of those levels is a final boss level, which I'm gonna have a lot to talk about with that level. That level's a subject of great interest for me. So the way progression in the game works, and progression is gonna be a big thing that I talk about later on. But the way it works is you finish a level and you'll get experience. You can use the experience in your shop to buy upgrades for your troops, buy new troops, buy upgrades for your crossbow. So in the game there is 7 units that you can use. One of them is a hobbit, there's a light elf, there is a dwarf, there is a wizard, there are golems, and there are blue dragons and angels. And the enemy has their own entirely separate set of troops. This is the only game where you don't get any of the troops that the enemy uses, which personally I like that. And like in the second game, you start to get all of the troops that the enemy has, and while I do like the second game a lot more than I like the first one, I actually did like the fact that the enemy just had troops that I knew nothing about. I couldn't look at their stats or anything, so I just sort of had to figure out what they were all about while I played. And the game's not too complicated. There's not like Epic War 2 where there's different attack types or anything. Basically, the only 2 attack types are normal attacks and attacks that do like area damage, and then there's also attacks that can stun people or launch them up into the air. So for a strategy-based game like this, there's one really important thing that I feel like is way more important than everything else, and that is balancing. And there are some games in the franchise, and this one is no exception, where the balancing is weird. If one troop is more powerful than the other troops, then the other troops are never going to get used. And that makes the entire experience a little less interesting after a while, because and while this game doesn't have any issues of like serious repetition or anything like some of the fucking future games, there is a pretty significant point in the game where certain troops are pretty much just no longer viable, and that is level I believe it's level 7 or 8, when the enemy starts sending out this centaur unit that has like a unicorn horn, but it's not a unicorn, it's a centaur. And this unit will basically just demolish everything that is a hobbit or a light elf. It'll also destroy dwarves. Dwarves have a little stun attack, but the stun attack doesn't work against the centaur. And basically, once the enemy starts spawning these centaur units, there's nothing that you can do other than to spam wizards, which at the time, wizards are the most powerful unit you can have realistically. And with the way mana works on like level 7 and 8, wizards are gonna be the thing that you're saving up for. And I mean, like later on in the game, wizards you can like just spam wizards, but at this point in the game, you really want the wizards, because they're the only things other than your crossbow that can kill those centaur units. And from that point onward, up until the very last level, so from like levels 9 to 14, which is like half the game, there's 2 units, and remember, you only get 7. There's 2 of them that are pretty much useless. And that's something that I'm not a huge fan of. And it's pretty much impossible to perfectly balance a game like this. There's so many little variables that come into play, which even something as like small as how the game engine processes multiple units on screen and how that could affect balancing. I mean, there's so many little tiny intricacies with this game, and Lasmalin's working on like making a remaster, and he says the project is going to take a long time, and I understand because, well, this game seems simple on the surface, so it takes a little bit of thought, and I realize, man, there's a lot that goes into this. Like, there's a lot of really tiny little details that need to be perfect. There's something else that's also really unbalanced with this game, and it's the crowd control attacks, which the Centaur has a crowd control attack, but I'll give the Centaur a pass because it's an attack that's, like, literally right in front of him. He's not a very fast unit. You can gun him down with some wizards. He's a pretty straightforward unit. There was never a point during any of my playthroughs, whether I was, like, getting test footage or I was actually playing the playthrough like 2 years ago, where I was like, man, this Centaur unit is just unfun to play against. I can't say the same for the Archdevil and the Red Dragon. The Red Dragon's not that bad because its really big hitbox makes it easy to gun down with a crossbow, and it doesn't have nearly as much HP as the Archdevil. The Archdevil was the point where the game went from being strategy based to being, okay, save up mana and buy your biggest troop base because nothing can stop an Archdevil. You could theoretically kill it with wizards if the wizards are out of its range, but you gotta understand this Archdevil unit attacks really, really fast, and I'll have something on screen that'll show you just how fast this thing attacks. And everything it hits gets launched up into the air, and it attacks so fast that basically the moment whatever it hits the ground, it'll get launched up again. So this guy is gonna destroy everything that does not ignore crowd control. So the units you get that ignore crowd control are golems, the dragons, and the angels. So by the time these Archdevils come out, you really are limited to 3 troops that you can realistically use if you want a chance at winning. And again, that is an issue I find with the other games as well, where there comes a point where there are really just units that are better than other units. And this game gets really bad, especially towards those last 2 or 3 levels. Levels like 11 through 14 is where the game, I feel personally, is at its weakest. And it's a shame because I really feel like those are the levels where the game should be at its best. That's the point in time where you're a casual player who's never seen this game before, just picked it up. This is for the casual player. The experience should be the first 4 levels, 5 levels is you learning how to play, like, because the game's not entirely easy to play. It requires a lot of keyboard navigation if you want to be really proficient at it. And then, like, levels 7 through 10 are the player figuring out how to beat all these new enemy units, but then after level 10, all the way up until the final boss level, it's kind of the same thing over and over again, but the enemy just sends out more and more big units, which just makes you more restricted on what you want to do. And ultimately, and this is the most unbalanced part of this game, funny enough, I haven't even gotten to this yet, and you knew it was coming if you know anything about this game, but the crossbow that you get is just ridiculous. It should not be as good as it is. And as much as I love really powerful mounted weapons strapped to my castle, and I can aim it and I can destroy things with it, it's really satisfying, but it's kind of like silly putty, where you're really like, you're in the need with it and you're like loving it and it's awesome, and then 10 minutes later you're like, I wish it did, like, I wish it was something else, you know. And I definitely feel the same for the crossbow. The game becomes reliant on crossbow. I don't think it's actually possible. Well, you can't beat the final boss without the crossbow, but I don't even think you can beat some of the last levels without a crossbow, because you need to save up mana. In order to get more mana, you have to get at least half of your max mana, and then you can buy a mana upgrade, which costs half your max mana, and then you'll be able to get more mana. So it's a long process of just saving up mana. And the game does a pretty good job with this, because in the later levels you start with more mana, so you can get up to the higher numbers a little quicker, which is something that I appreciate. But you are waiting to build up your economy, and that is an intentional feature. You are trying to defend. You're playing defensive, and playing defensive would be really fun if the crossbow wasn't so overpowered. So basically, even on levels like 13 and 14 and the beginning of 15, I could send out two dwarf units, which are like one of the cheapest units, and just have my crossbow locked in place, and I'm just gonna destroy everything up until a dragon or an archdevil starts walking, and then I can just maneuver the arrow keys. There's never any point, unless I'm being like really stupid, where I'm actually at risk of dying if I have an upgraded crossbow, which is not fun. I thought for me playing the game, the most fun I had was with levels like 7 through 10, where they were introducing all these new units, and I was suddenly put into this spot where I'm like, oh crap, I've got to go defensive, and I've got to figure out how to kill these units, you know? And there's that intrigue, there's that wanting to do better, to be better, and to figure out what's going on and not die. I mean, there's always like, oh, I want to do it first try. I want to figure this out first try. I want to prove that I'm good at this game. Um, Back when I first played this game, I was so bad at it, and only now, whenever I was getting test footage and I've got like experience up till Epic War 4 with how to play these games, and I played it again. Like I played it again like years later, and I was like, damn, like this isn't even really that hard. Why was I like complaining about this back when I first did it? Um, but even still, like your average new player is not going to be crazy good with the keyboard keys. So, like, and you could argue that that's the reason why the crossbow's so strong, because oh, new players aren't really going to be very good with their troops, which is a terrible, terrible justification. But I feel like that's the reason why they made it so strong. Was so that new players would not struggle as much. You should struggle. It shouldn't be easy. It should not be easy. You should not be able to beat every level first try. And I firmly believe that. And I think that if you're sitting down and you're playing this game, it needs to challenge you. And Epic War 1 is not very challenging. Until it is. You see, in level 15, after you destroy the last castle, a boss monster appears, and it is the only time this guy appears. It is called the End. Its name is literally the End, and it is a giant floating castle that shoots laser beams that hit this massive area, knock everything up into the air, causes a crap ton of damage, kills everything. And there's this boss is kind of like a double-edged sword. There's one thing I like about it, and it's that it validates using hobbits again, using hobbits and the light elves, which you haven't been able to use since level like 9. And you can use them again because now you need to send in the hobbits to slow down this tower, because this tower is moving towards your castle. It has like two. I want to say it had like 2 million HP, if not at like 200,000 or something, some crazy number. And it was like you weren't gonna kill it anytime soon. So you had to slow it down. You had to, and it was an interesting. And it's interesting because like you could figure it out on your own, realizing really quickly like, oh, I'm not gonna be able to kill this quick enough. I need to like slow it down. And then you would start to like naturally come to the realization of, oh, I need to use my small troops that don't cost anything to just go and get that slow attack animation to keep going on loop over and over again. And then you can get like the angel units and the dragon unit, and they can go in there and they can kind of tank some of that damage and dish some damage out on their own. But the majority of the damage you're going to deal to this tower unit, this end unit, is from your crossbow. And there's actually a thing in the game where you can hold down all the keys. At least it was like this on Congregate. Whenever I played Lasmalin's Flash version that he sent me, since Flash Player doesn't work online anymore, I had to use a Flash Player that he sent me that he downloaded off of the Adobe website or whatever. And there was a way that you could hold down all of the arrow keys. You have to hold down A, S, D, and F to fire all 4 of your arrow types. And if you clicked off the screen and then hit 0, the crossbow would just continue firing on its own without you having to like hold the buttons, which was a really nice quality of life thing. But the game never told you could do this. I don't even actually know how people figured out you could do it. I had to go to the. I just muted my mic. I just muted my mic. Hold on. Okay, I'm still talking. Okay. Jesus Christ, Shay, what the frick? I had to go into the. much did I lose? Basically, I had to go into the congregate comment section because I didn't know how to beat this stupid boss, and it's annoying because this should have been like the penultimate moment in the game. This should have been the point where the game really came together and finalized this really awesome experience where you finally get to put your skill to the test. You're going up against this epic boss unit. You finally have the chance to like prove that you figured out how to play this game. But this boss is just so strong, and you have to rely on the crossbow. There's no satisfaction when you kill this boss. Because all you did was hold down one, which is the hotkey to send out hobbits. Use your automatic crossbow firing thing, so you don't even need to maneuver the crossbow, because the tower's so big, like the boss is so big, you never need to move the crossbow. And then just spam dragons and angels every time they come off cooldown. And that sounds really simple, and it is really simple, but in terms of like strategy, it's kind of, I would say it's kind of dumb. There's not like, the game has complicated like things to it, but none of it matters because the whole knockback effect is so strong that like literally like there's only one possible way to beat this boss, and I wish there was more than one possible way to beat it. But with the way the game's programmed, the only way really is to kill it with the crossbow and then use your angel and dragon unit to dish out some extra damage. Um, and I mean, there's a couple of other little things with balancing. The golem unit is really underpowered, and I think he should have a crap ton more health than he does because like he's good because he's slow. He naturally comes off as like this meat shield for your wizards or for your hobbits or whatever if you're trying to like build up a little stockpile of them or something. I don't know. But like he comes off as this tanky unit that's not supposed to do a crap ton of damage or anything, but he does have a lot of HP, and he can't be knocked up into the air. He comes off as a unit that you could use to set up some kind of like front. This is obviously before you start using like dragons and angels, where the game becomes really mind numbing. But the golem unit just doesn't have any HP. He's so weak. He gets killed so fast. Like, oh, I feel like even if he had double his HP, he still wouldn't be very good. That's how weak he is. Um, and another thing is the buyable trap. You can buy a trap in the game. You can buy a turret in the game, and you have a spell where you get to rain arrows down from the sky. All three of these are very underwhelming. The trap should stun whatever is inside of it. It doesn't stun for some reason. It should, especially when you upgrade it. The turret costs like 1,000 mana, which is it's a pretty big investment for whenever you're trying to get to that 9,999 mana, so that you can start like really building up and spamming angels. And normally you would want to get the turret early game because it's defense, but it literally does nothing. It attacks one unit. The attack doesn't even one shot anything. It's just a really terrible tower. And the rain of arrows is nice, but it doesn't kill enough units. It can do decent damage, but it doesn't do enough damage to justify and it's like you don't pay anything to use it. You just use it when it comes off cooldown. But for what it's worth, and for you to like spend your experience upgrading it in the shop, I really feel like it should have more bang for its buck. It can come in as a clutch moment where it's like, damn, I really like, I need a moment to just regather my stuff. Oh, look, my rain of arrows came off cooldown. This will at the very least stun everything for a moment, give me just another minute to breathe. I mean, there's some moments in the later Epic War games, like especially in Epic Wars like 2 and 3, where there were these like very clutch moments where I literally was on the verge of dying, but like one unit or one thing stepped out in front of my castle and absorbed that attack. It's like it comes down to the second, and it's stuff like that that really made those games a freaking blast to play. But Epic War 1 doesn't really have anything like that. Epic War 1 is one of those games where if the enemy unit's at your castle, you're probably gonna die unless your crossbow's really strong. But if your crossbow's really strong, they're not gonna be at your castle anyway, so you can see why. So, yeah, so the balancing of this game. I've been talking about the balancing for like 15 minutes, dude. Yeah, I'm gonna give it like a 1 out of 10. It's really bad. The balancing is terrible in this game. And like, I get it that It was a small development team. They probably didn't have any beta testers, and they just tested it themselves. But there were some things that I feel like they should have noticed and they should have fixed. Like, the knockback is too overpowered, overbearing. The crossbow is a little too makes the game a little too easy. Things that could have just been tinkered with a little bit to make the final product feel like a more polished game. Hello. So, you might be slightly concerned that I gave the balancing in this game a 1 out of 10, and it seems a bit excessive. And originally, I was actually going to give it a 3 out of 10, but I revised my script, and just the more I thought about all of the little issues, the more it just started to, like, really get to me. And I got more upset the longer and longer I thought about it, because some of these issues were not that not that hard to fix, but then I thought about the actual gameplay, right? And gameplay is actually what I'm going to talk about next. I'm going to play a lot into what a lot of the balancing issues were. Now, when it comes to gameplay, I really like to just think about how it felt to play the game, and one big thing I'm going to touch on was this feeling of progression. And progression was a really important part of making this game enjoyable, and I really liked that part about this game. And I'll give you a really good example of how the progression worked. Also, I got the world's squeakiest chair. I hope it doesn't make the audio too bad. Biggest example of progression was definitely the mana usage. So from like levels 1 to 3, just getting to 100, 200, 500 mana was a big deal. It was really hard to get that much mana. And I remember there was a point in the game where the wizard was this unit that I had to save up for, and the wizard was really hard to get. And it felt really good to get the wizard early on because, well, the wizard was awesome. I could just have hobbits in the front and the wizard would kill pretty much everything except for that centaur unicorn unit, which I needed a couple wizards to kill it, but I could kill it with wizards. Obviously, once the enemy started sending out dragons and archdevils and all those bigger units, wizards were way, way, way less effective unless I had like 20 to 30 of them. So, but the thing is, right, is that at one point in the game, it really was a task to save up for wizards, and it really felt like I was struggling to get there. And then later on in the game, it was easy to get wizards because I was getting more mana, I was generating mana faster. So there is this inclining feeling of physical progression in the game where I really did feel like I was getting further along in this story because I was generating mana faster. My resources were coming faster. I was able to send out more troops. You know, my crossbow got all these upgrades. You get all these extra arrows. You really do feel like you started from the bottom and you slowly grew your kingdom, even though it's never shown visually. Through gameplay, it feels like you grew your kingdom, your empire, and you just continued to grow and grow and grow as you progressed through these levels. And it's hard to say where exactly you go in this game because the map is kind of weird. It's just you follow this line and then it ends on an island. But I'd like to think that you're it's like Epic War 2 almost, where you sort of just progress deeper and deeper into the enemy territory as you go along, and as you progress deeper, you keep getting attacked by these larger and larger monsters. You know, at first it's just these demonic unicorn horse creatures that are pretty intimidating, but like once you go deeper, you know, they start sending dragons after you, and they start sending literal demons after you to stop you. And the gameplay just adds this level of intrigue, and I'll get into that with the next section when I talk about the aesthetics of the game. But just this gameplay of like you're pushing forward, and as you're pushing forward, you're gaining more traction, you're getting more support, you're able to farm resources more efficiently, your troops are better trained, and this feeling of just progression from starting from really slow beginning to just having this ability to spawn dragons and angel units and, you know, the hundreds of wizards if I really wanted to. It's a really awesome feeling, and that was definitely one of the biggest things that Epic War had going for it. Now, the other thing that was going for the game that I think was personally better than the physical progression was the skill progression of the game. So Epic War is not inherently a hard game. At least up until level 15, it's not a hard game. And There is two ways to play the game. One is that you can use the mouse to click every single button, but the player will quickly realize that the mouse is a very inefficient way to play, and I believe I was one of those people that started out clicking everything, quickly realized, oh, there's hotkeys. I think the game could have done a better job advertising the hotkeys as an alternative to using the mouse, because it did take me a while to realize they were there. But once I realized they were there, it became a completely different game, where now it's not so much how fast can I click on things, but it's more of how much can I memorize these keys and spam them. And then, Epic War is a game of spamming units. It is, because the only thing that stops me is a cooldown. Later games fix this by adding a limit to how many units you can have. But Epic War, it was quite literally just spam units to my heart's contempt. And there's a certain charm to that, right? I actually quite enjoyed that. But it became obvious later on that there were certain units that were better than others. Now, I commented back on the balancing that it was a little too favored towards the dragon and archangel units and the wizards, that all the other units became obsolete. But the discovery of, like, okay, wizards are really, really good early game, and then my washer is being super loud. Hold on. I don't know why my washer got so loud. It started like screaming. It wants me to save it, but I don't know from what. So as I was saying, like you have the discovery of, okay, wizards are really good, and then you later on have the discovery of, okay, if I just use a couple of dwarves in the beginning, I can save up to get the mana upgrades faster. I can save up to get these bigger units faster, and this feeling of emotional, like, progression of just, I'm getting better with the hotkeys, I'm getting better with the turret, I'm getting better at the game. And that feeling of progression is completely different than the physical progression, but they go hand in hand, side by side with each other. And that feeling, right, that feeling of growth, both from physically in the game and also just from emotionally getting better at the game, was by far the single greatest reason why I enjoyed Epic War, and why I was actually really excited to play the second game. That feeling of progression was so impactful that it completely overmined, I guess you could say, all of the balancing issues that the game had. And there was a point in time where it kind of stagnated, and it was from levels like 11 to 14, where that emotional progression and the physical progression, well, actually, I take that back. The physical progression stopped, right? Because at this point, you're just maxing out all your units, you've unlocked everything, you're just getting more mana. But that emotional progression stayed, because the levels are still getting harder, and I'm just basically perfecting my skills at that point. And, it comes down to this last level, the level 15. It's literally called Final Boss or something. And this is it. The player thinks this is it. This is the culmination of me getting all of the upgrades in the shop and leveling up, and this is a payoff of all of my, learning the buttons, the hotkeys, the how to use everything properly, what units to work with. This is the test. This is the final test of my skill and what I've achieved. And the game completely threw it away. Yeah. No. I was going to give gameplay, I would have given gameplay a 10 out of 10. Despite the balancing issues, were it not for the final boss. The final boss, okay, I'm going to give, from levels 1 to level 14, the difficulty is like a 3 out of 10. And the reason why it's so easy is because the crossbow is overpowered. But the difficulty of the game on level 15 is easily a 9 out of 10, without a doubt. One of the hardest things I've ever had to do in a game was to beat it. Beat this game, because that final boss is ridiculous. There's a very thick line. It's not a thin line, a very thick line, where you could easily have made a boss that was hard, but not unbeatable. Hard, but not frustrating. Hard, but makes the player scratch their head. Makes the player think, okay, I can spam the hobbits and light elves to slow it down. I can use the angels and the dragons to buy me time, so that I can destroy it with the crossbow. Right, and that's you could have given it a pretty decent health pool,
anywhere from half of what it actually has up to maybe even 3/4 of what it actually has, and it would not have diminished the challenge, the satisfaction. But when I tell you this boss has so much HP that it is actually impossible to beat it unless you are actually like on your shit. And there's a couple of things that really damper with that. And the first one is that the game limits you to 5 actions at once. So basically, there are 4 arrows you can shoot, and if you're shooting 4 arrows, you can spawn 1 unit, which I'm going to be mashing hobbits. And that's my 5 actions. I can't just hold all of that down, and then if I'm holding it all down and I try to spawn an angel, the angel doesn't spawn because I'm limited to 5 actions. And that's an engine limitation. I'm sure Lasmo's going to fix that when he remasters the game. But it's just the fact that I even have to hold down 5 different keys at the same time that kind of goes to show, like, man, they're really asking a lot from me. And the payoff isn't even really that great, because even though my technical skills at the game were pretty decent, I would say, and I had all the max upgrades, I was getting clobbered by this boss just because of how much health it had. And it didn't feel like an accomplishment when I finally beat it. And you'll see with these review videos, and if you just watched my Epic War series, the game has a pretty good habit of letting me down at the end, of just having a downer ending and being not disappointing. This game wasn't disappointing, it was frustrating, because I felt like it was really fun up until the end, and then the end literally was a hard boss. And it was not hard in the sense of, oh, I just need to get my technical skills up, I need to really like hammer down and focus. Like, all the hammering down and focusing aside, this boss is fucking hard. It's hard beyond fun. It's hard to a point where I don't enjoy it. Where all of the skill and all of the focus and all the frustration, the video was an hour long, and I'm pretty sure I edited it. Edited is a hard word to say. I put editing into it, and it was still an hour long. I think the raw footage was close to 2 hours long of me like beating my head up against a wall because I can't kill this stupid tower. And I get this feeling in my head of like, man, I must just not be good at the game. I thought I was progressing emotionally. I thought I was getting good with the hotkeys. I thought I was getting good at the game. But I must not be good because I can't kill this stupid tower. And then I go read in the comment section and congregate, and they're like, oh, so yeah, this tower unit's kind of stupid, but the way to beat it is you use this little trick where you click outside the screen and then you hold down 0 and your crossbow fires automatically. Which is a big deal because remember, you only have 5 actions, and 4 of them is me spamming ASDF on the keyboard so I can shoot all the arrows. Now all of a sudden I don't have to hold ASDF because the crossbow's firing automatically. So now I can literally just focus on everything else. And that made the game go from incredibly stressful to excessively simple. And when I tell you it was one of the most frustrating moments for me playing any Epic War game, that it wasn't that I was bad at the game, right? It was that I didn't have any awareness of this weird feature in the game that was never explained, which was this automatic crossbow thing. Never knew that it existed. And, you know, the fact is that the boss was just ridiculous. It was not fun. It was not even close to balanced with anything else in the game, which I've already talked about. Balancing got a 1 out of 10, mainly because of this boss. And at the end of it, I finally found this secret weapon that made it 10 times easier, and I beat the boss, and I felt like shit. I felt like all of the progress I had made had been torn from my soul and beaten to death with a baseball bat right in front of me. It was miserable. And it was it was honestly the saddest part of the game for me because I really liked it. But it just wasn't really that invigorating at the end, you know, and I'm gonna give gameplay like a 6 out of 10, and I would have given it a 10 out of 10 if the boss had been balanced better. But gameplay overall, for what the game had with its limitations and what it was a really good experience overall, and I think that I really enjoyed it up until that final boss. That final boss just really left me with a sour taste on my tongue with this game. But that feeling of progression was just so impactful, and it really motivated me to keep playing and recording, and I genuinely enjoyed it. And, you know, there's one game in the franchise where I can't say I really enjoyed playing it, you know? And if you've watched my playthrough, you can probably guess which game it was. But, like, Yeah, I mean, it's a shame. It really is a shame just how much that final boss brings it down. And Laz, I know you're working on like updating the game and remastering it and fixing a lot of the little balancing issues. And I hope you put some special care into this final boss because, yeah, it needs help. It needs a lot of help. And I think the game would be this game would easily be so much better if the final boss was just tampered with a little bit. Was just his health was brought down a little bit. Obviously bring down the health of the final boss. Maybe make it move slower and attack slower so that you can sacrifice having the crossbow not be so overpowered. The crossbow's not as overpowered. I feel like I have to rely more on using my troops. You take away the really ridiculous crowd control that the Archdemon and the Red Dragon have. That way I can feel good using a bunch of hobbits and light elves in conjunction with wizards to tackle these big enemies. And then all of a sudden this feeling of emotional progression can just be so much stronger because I'm pushing through. I'm using my resources to my advantage. I'm building up. I think it would be good to make the start of the levels harder as well. Like at the beginning of the level, just start the game off with them rushing you with big units. That way, I don't have time to just sit there with my thumbs twiddling around each other, waiting to get all the mana up so I can start spamming angels and dragons. That way, in the beginning, I actually have to fight. And for a minute there, at least in a couple levels, that was the case. I had to fight during the beginning because my crossbow wasn't leveled up enough to just do everything for me. And I liked that. I enjoyed that. And there was even one part where I died because I was too greedy. I was punished. It was the only time in the game where I was punished, other than the final battle. As upset as I was, like, the game just beat my ass. It made me want to sit down and try again. Like it was super like invigorating, just being beat down like that and like picking myself up and being like, okay, lesson learned. It was awesome, but it only happened like one time. And then afterwards the crossbow got too powerful and the game became a mindless mess of just getting to the final boss so I could be pissed. Um a lot of things to work on there, but I hope that gives you a really good idea of how I feel about it. Alrighty, so balancing the game, an easy 1 out of 10. A lot of issues that I've touched on. The gameplay, a 6 out of 10. Definitely a solid baseline there, but due to some of the issues that came from balancing, the gameplay itself took a really massive hit. But one thing that I really wanted to take some interest in talking about was the aesthetics of this game, and mainly just the art and the music. Seeing as how this game actually has no written lore, something that is changed in the second game and only in the second game, there is actually quite a bit that I would like to talk about when it comes to the game's art, and that is the first part is definitely talking about how dark this game is. This game is so dark. I don't know why. The only things in the game that have a brightness of above 50% is like the blue dragon, the red dragon, and the angel unit. Every other unit in the game is just so dark. Oh, and also the ogre unit from the enemy, the green one, that is just like, it's so green, like it's so bright green that it almost doesn't match everything else. But like the game is just so gritty, and it has this atmosphere of just like it doesn't have the atmosphere of dark cloudy day where it's windy, and it has this awesome vibe to it. It's dark and gritty, like I'm in a jail cell and the only light I have is from there's one little window in the top with these bars on it, and I can look out and I can see this beautiful world, but I'm in this dark gritty room. And you could make an argument both ways, and I'm going to make the argument that that's actually a pretty interesting thing. And I'm going to talk about the downside to having such a dark, gritty game. And that downside is that it's hard to get new players interested in it. You take a look at the screenshots of the game, and you're like, this game looks kind of shitty. I mean, it looks kind of dark and depressing, and the game's art isn't really what I would call fantastic. And I'll talk more about the actual art, the character art later. But just as a whole, like, this atmosphere is unpleasant, and it's not inviting, and it's not welcoming, and ultimately that ends up being one of its greatest strengths, in my opinion, because this dark gritty atmosphere paints a picture that lore just couldn't. And there could be written lore that talks about this dreadful war and all this betrayal and death and despair and darkness, which is something that is in the second game. But the first game doesn't need that written lore to tell the player, like, this isn't a war of righteousness. This isn't a war of like glory. This is a war for survival. These units that you're sending out to this battlefield, they're not fighting out of justice. They're fighting out of necessity, because if they don't fight, they're gonna die. And there's nothing in the game that suggests this, but just because of how dark and how gritty it is, and how unpleasant it just feels to be in these environments, you get this feeling like these units I'm sending out are fighting for their lives. That whatever enemy they're up against is trying to destroy this world that they live in, and that if they don't kill these enemies, they're gonna die, whether they fight or not. And that added a level, like a layer to the game that is a very subconscious thing. I'm not actively sitting there thinking, oh wow, these units are fighting for their lives, but like on the subconscious level, I understood that, like, this isn't just a war. This is literally life or death, whether they fight or not. And it added this level of intensity, this level of necessity, that I needed to kill this enemy. And I don't know what the enemy was doing, and the game never explains what the enemy's up to, but there's a couple of subtle hints that get dropped, like the enemy sends demons after you, like literal demons that shoot fire into the air, and it's super intense. What are these enemies? And the game never answers these questions, but it does add this really nice level of intrigue of just like, what is going on with this game, like what is the purpose behind this? Like, why do I get an angel and they get a demon as their powerful units? Like, what is the deal with that? Because obviously my team, my race or whatever, is not a bunch of like angel species. It's clearly people that live on Earth, people that inhabit it, and it's a bunch of random people. I mean, you get orcs, you get dwarves, you get hobbits, you get elves, and then you get like an angel and dragons and stuff. Like all of like up until the angel, these are clearly all units that live on the Earth, and they're fighting against other units that live on the Earth, like goblins and ogres and trolls and that weird unicorn centaur unit. These are all like Earth inhabitants, and then you introduce this angel and this demon, and all of a sudden it's like, is this war being influenced by heaven and hell? And why are these units fighting each other? Why are they fighting to the death in this really grim world where it really does seem like it's either fight or die? And it kind of goes all the way up to this final battle where you finally push back, and as you fight, you continue to grow and you get stronger. You learn how to use your resources better, and you get more units, more people join your cause, more people are supporting you. And it's almost like this weird feeling of like you start from nothing and you work towards this eventual end goal where you're fighting this last ditch effort from the enemy, where they unleash their secret weapon, which was this giant flying tower. And the music, there's only one time in the entire game where this second song is played, and it's during that final battle. And that song really just helps to put the emphasis that, like, this is it. This is the all or nothing. The enemy is on their last leg, and this is their last chance to stop you. And they put up one hell of a fight, because that stupid tower is crazy strong. And that's awesome. And it really, truly helps to insinuate and just sort of bring out that whole epic part of this war, where I'm fighting to the death, and if I don't win, I'm gonna die. And the game doesn't need to tell me that. I can tell just by looking at it, by how dark and how gritty it is. And that made it really, that was a part of the thing that just made this game really fun. Now, later games, they have cleaner art style and more vibrant worlds that you are placed into, and they have more lore and whatever that actually helps you understand what you're doing. Like the third game is all about conquest, and the second game there's actually a more directed attack towards this Lord of Hell and the tirade of darkness and whatnot. And the fourth game is more or less just a self-righteous journey from one character going around the world and like trying to unite everybody and try to dispute the chaos. But the first game, it's never really explained to you why you're fighting, but you can put together the pieces in your own head. And I don't have answers to the first game, and hopefully when Lazarlin remasters it, he'll include answers. But I was quite okay with just not having any and being able to guess. I thought that was charming, that I didn't really know, but it was interesting and it felt important. Like, these characters weren't just fighting for the sake of a video game, they were fighting because their world was in danger. It was immersive, and it was cool up until, the final boss was unbeatable. But yeah, and obviously, to talk a little bit on the actual characters themselves, uh they are very pixelated. They are kind of blurry almost. If you look at a close-up version of the sprite, it's blurry, and this is a close-up of the goblin unit that the enemy has. And next to it, I'm going to show you that same unit that is in HD. It's drawn really well, actually. It looks cool. Um, I said goblin. It's a hobbit unit. I don't know why I said goblin. I think there was also one for the goblin that Lazarlin showed me. But basically, you get to see like this unit that just looks really, really nice. And if this unit that's really high definition was in the game, it would have made the game a whole different experience. But obviously, something happened. I'm gonna guess it was some issue with exporting, or the game was too big with the HD art, and they had to scale it all down. And the developers had to make sacrifices, and they turned that really nice, clean art into this more pixelated, gritty art, which in its own way just added to the style of the first and second game. But it's kind of sad to see like how good the game could have looked, but the developers were limited by the platform they were uploading to, or their own game engine. Maybe the game was too laggy on the engine they had created because of how detailed all the art was, and it was just too much. And I can't really fault the game for that. I mean, the developers were working with what they had. This game came out in the early 2000s, at least I think it did. And I mean, as far as I'm aware, Epic War was the first game that was like this, that had you on the left side trying to kill enemies on the right side along this linear track. And there's other games now that have the Epic War formula but better, like Stick War, for example, and a couple others that I can't be bothered to remember. But like games that took this formula from Epic War and made it their own unique formula. But all in all, Epic War was the first game that I know of that tried to do something like this, and it did a great job with what it had. And there were limitations, and it did good. And it's a game that I think the developers should be proud of, even though they absolutely bombed it with that final boss. It was a really good game, and quite revolutionary in the indie game genre, which was not really something that was that big at the time. Indie games were pretty low down until Five Nights at Freddy's came out in like 2012 or something, 2014, when Five Nights at Freddy's came out, and the whole indie game genre just exploded. But up until then, like when we think about indie games, during that time, the only games I can really think about are like Slender Man, and like indie games weren't really something that was in the forefront. And the only time you would ever play an indie game was if you were at school on coolmathgames.com playing Bloons Tower Defense 3 on Cool Math Games. Like, that was the pinnacle of indie games. And, you have a game like Epic War, which I wish Epic War had been uploaded to Cool Math, because I definitely would have played it in school. But, like, it really made a statement for what indie games really were. And I think the game holds a really special place in history, at least in the indie game world. And for that, I'm going to give its aesthetics a solid 9 out of 10. A solid 9 out of 10, despite all the limitations, despite how unwelcoming this atmosphere feels. I think it really contributed to making the game and the overall franchise just a success. And it goes largely in part due to the way the art looks. So, yeah, good job. It's been like 20 years since you made the game, but good job. You did a good job. In my original script, I was going to cover playability and give that a rating out of 10, but I've decided I'm not going to, because I think I've actually talked about everything I wanted to talk about with this game. This game doesn't have any replay value, but when you really think about it, none of the games do. The only game that actually has some kind of replay value was the second game, because you could theoretically just beat the whole game as the human race and then be like, okay, well, let's see what the elves and the orcs have. And I'll talk more about that in its own review video. And the third game is all about replay value, which made me hate it, but I'll get to that in its own review video. And I think the fourth game was the only one that really did replay value, like, really well. But, that's beside the point. Replayability is not really a big deal. for me in terms of playing the game, because I feel like once I beat the game the first time, I had the full experience. I didn't need to go back and play it again, you know? Um, so I'm not gonna go ahead. I'm not gonna grade playability out of 10 because the game is playable, but it's not really worth delving into it like I did with balancing the gameplay and the aesthetics. And I think the developers did a pretty good job going forward and expanding on what they built in the first game, and it's awesome because it really is fun to play. And there are some pretty significant issues that I hope Lasmalin and his development team really crack down on, and they just make this game an overall better experience that can be played on a better platform like Steam, where you can play without having to deal with all of the issues that most indie games deal with, which is just more like accessibility. And a lot of times you look at websites like Congregate and you're like, man, I could have never gotten on this shit in school. And the game's lack of exposure comes from the platforms that it's put on. And you put the game on Steam, all 5 games, which is what Laszlo said his plan was, to put like all 5 games in a bundle where you'd have the option to play each one of them in a succession, but it would be one game that was actually all 5 games that you could buy for like $5 or $10 on Steam, and you'd get the Epic War experience that's on all these remastered engines with better balancing and hopefully some new gameplay mechanics and whatnot that get introduced in some of the later games. But overall, it just sounds like a really exciting project that has the potential to do a lot of good. And I'm hopeful for that, and I'm looking forward to it. And Laswin's always given me updates like, oh yeah, well, progress is slow. And I'm like, yeah, I understand the whole progress is slow thing. I told Laswin I'd make this video like 2 months ago. Yet here I am, actually making the video because I just had a random burst of inspiration today. Like, I literally cleaned my whole apartment. I did all the dishes. I'm not going to fold laundry. That's just never going to happen. But, like, I don't know. I just felt really motivated to do stuff today. And one thing I decided to do, because I cleaned off my countertop, I was like, you know what? I'm going to set my laptop down, put the camera down, and just finish this damn video. Editing, it's going to be fun. I'll probably have this video edited sometime next year, but, the date currently, by the way, is the 31st of January. So whenever you see this video, just know it probably took anywhere from the 31st of January to when you're seeing it, or when it was uploaded, for me to edit it, because I'm just going to upload it right after I'm done editing it. So, yeah, we'll see how long that takes. So, anyway, that was my Epic War 1 review. Epic Wars 2, 3, and 4 are going to get similar reviews, but now that I'm finally done with this review video, I'm going to jump into Epic War 5. I'm probably going to record it very similar to how I'm recording right now, with the face cam, but it's going to be like in the corner of the screen, like in typical Let's Play, with the better mic quality, except I'm going to have it screwed onto its little stand, which you might be able to see over there next to the TV. So I'm not like spinning it around and I have 2 hands and whatnot, but obviously good things are to come. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Shapers99. I'm sorry for the long hiatus. I want to make a video talking about that, but I don't really know how I would do it because most of the stuff I want to talk about is not pleasant. Anyway, I'll see you on the next one, guys. Peace out.